And at the end of this week, the cell was calibrated using the internal heater. So this is the result of the last 3 sweeps superimposed, showing very good agreement. And this is the calibration based upon the heater, so showing that the calibrator had not changed in its characteristics. Well, what have we learned from this, if anything? First of all, this showed power of 800 milliwatts, 333 kilojoules of energy were produced during this study. That's enough energy to boil twice the amount of heavy water that was in it. The behavior showed reproducible patterns. I mean, I can turn it off and turn it on at will. A linear relationship between applied current and excess power was demonstrated. And it suggests other metals that have been found to produce excess energy. And these include gold, titanium, in addition to now platinum and palladium. That they may not have, the reaction may not be in these metals. They may only be substrates for something that's on the surface. And it may be a surface reaction of some unknown material that's actually the active material. And it turns out people use palladium because it has a historical background, but it is really a pretty lousy choice because of its ability to leak material out of the surface. So I'm going to explore in more detail platinum and hopefully overcome some of the reproducibility problems. Okay, thank you.
Have you thought of doing silver?
Yes, I have run silver. In fact, it's tried plating on silver, and I've run silver.
Straight silver?
Yeah, straight silver. But I haven't done it enough that I can be sure that it wouldn't do something, and it would be worth exploring. But platinum is so nice because you can clean it very well. Silver you can't clean all that well, and it's hard to start with a good surface.
Just a comment there. Paul and I suggested in 1989 that silver is electronic structures are similar to fully loaded plating gear, and it may actually really help.
Well, I would certainly.
Les George also had success.
Yeah, he doesn't have to worry about surface layers.
Right.
On his.
Yes, sir.
Did you monitor with the target needs to be commission of helium or tritium?
I have no way of measuring helium. Tritium, I would have to have samples measured at Los Alamos, and I have not done that yet.
Some solubility of deuterium and platinum is abysmal.
Right.
Nevertheless, you're very wide in chemistry. I think you're actually going to be using it for that into your bulk platinum.
I can measure the activity. I use the open circuit voltage. I have a reference electrode in there, and when you deload palladium, even let's say 0.2 of a micron on the surface of platinum, you get a curve that goes down, and then you get the arrest of the alpha beta transition and goes on down, and that takes hours to occur, even with a small amount of palladium. Platinum, on the other hand, when it deloads, it goes chunk like that, indicating that there's not much there compared to palladium.
This could be a quantum fluid.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's not quite the range at which it comes out is very low. You won't poise the electrode potential at the hydrogen value. So there's a solubility and diffusion coefficient of hydrogen that you have to use in order to make that complete.
Well, yeah, I also
But it can be done.
I also weighed a sample before and after, and there's no weight increase. There simply isn't anything in there.
Before people go, there are some papers.
Well, that does count his contribution to the
I don't know any of that.
I use LabVIEW. I'm familiar with LabVIEW.
It's carefully doing the work with
It's kind of funny. It's amazing how many people react to this. You know what? Laser, right? Going on with president, chancellor,
normal symbol. Oh, it's nice. You can track it.
And people do this. That's all like fun. Say we didn't have price for this country. He couldn't give his talk. It was in the morning. Version of your reputation think you have to go around maybe.
When I interviewed going along with
When yours is
I
was able to.
Did you give it later?
Take a look at my
magnetic aspects, and of course, the problem with finding your mistakes.
This is their vacation. This is their dance together when you're short. I mean, they do a dance right there. It's a relax.
Well, there's also the mantra thing is that, real men don't plan their presentation.
Delays between some problems here in Newark and also delays in Jackson. Obviously, the snow that has been occurring that they've seen over the past 24 hours. High winds in the Rockies and along the immediate seaboard in the Atlantic, also looking at some very high winds. The western half of the country here, showing where the snow is. It is across parts of Arizona and New Mexico. Mongolia and Arizona could be seeing some significant snow, and also the White Mountains. In the Midwest, I think it's pretty much quiet for you. There's no major weather system affecting you today, but there has been some patchy drizzle from time to time due to fog. But in the Northeast, you know what it's like if you look outside your window. It is pouring in some locations due to very heavy rain. We have a very slow-moving storm system here, and if you're raining outside your house right now, it's pretty much going to rain on and off throughout the day. We're seeing some very heavy downpours, and a few locations may see up to as much as 1 to 3 inches. Across the southeast, much quieter. You're actually looking at some of the better weather across the area for today. Into tonight, snow remains in the west and the rain remains in the east. We do have some flood watches out for northern Virginia and also parts of Maryland due to the heavy rain, and fog is the problem in the nation's midsection where visibilities are considerably lower, and we're expecting to see travel to be difficult along I-94. Windy weather in the west and also in the mid-Atlantic. This Corvette was sponsored by Audi, and the dashing and daringly beautiful 86.
To become one of those old men who sit in lawn chairs on driveways and regret adventures I never took.
This is the 19th floor of the Hyatt Regency downtown Minneapolis, Minnesota.
In the year 2000.
It looks like we made the right move in changing rooms. The other room clearly was not going to begin to hold the crowd. And we're delighted that you're here. The session today was organized by the Forum on Physics and Society, and Aviva Brescher is going to make a quick announcement. Aviva? Okay, the first speaker today is Joel Achenbach of the Washington Post. I've known Joel for some time, since he used to do a column in the Washington Post called Why Things Are. And it was a delightful column. I wish he was still doing it. It took simple questions that people asked and it answered them. And it answered them in such a delightful way that it stuck in people's memory. And one of the early ones, for example, was that he had heard that if you have a helium-filled balloon in your automobile and you slam on the brakes, instead of going to the front, and it's like everything else in the car will, the Kleenex box and everything else, the balloon will go to the back. And Joel went out, bought a balloon, got in his car, went tearing down the street, slammed on the brakes. And it did indeed go to the back. But for actually getting out there and doing the the experiment that answers the question. And today, he's going to be talking about Captured by Aliens, a new book that he has out, and I think you're going to find it very informative. Joel lives in Washington with his wife and 3 children, none of whom are aliens.
Bob did not say is that every week I put him in my column. You know, in fact, it's always on deadline, and I always knew I could call over to Bob Park and say, Bob, real quick, tell me, you know, why is water so wet? You know, what is that wetness that I have? And he would always know. And so I had to kill the column when people started saying, why do you always quote this guy Bob Park? Anyway, I want to confess, I revere scientists, and in particular, I am in awe of physicists, and I'm conscious that I'm just a newspaper reporter, so I'm having sort of a I'm not worthy moment here. My book is sort of all over the place. Can you hear me in the back, by the way? Can you hear me? Okay. My book kind of runs all over the place. I started talking to Carl Sagan, I talked to Dan Golden at NASA, I hang out with the Mars Society people, Robert Zubrin. I spend time talking to a NASA engineer who's devising a laser-powered light sail to go to Alpha Centauri. I somehow wound up in the middle of Central America looking for the ejecta of the big impact at Chicxulub 65 million years ago that killed the dinosaurs. I'm not sure what that has to do with aliens, but somehow wound up in the book. So it has kind of an attention depth being on this bed in this Las Vegas hotel room. They were saying, what part of your body remembers the alien? And I said, I think it's just in my head. You know, I think that it was supposed to be my foot or something. I don't know. But the thing about aliens is having no memory of an encounter with an alien doesn't mean that you did not have an encounter with an alien. In fact, that exactly fits their modus operandi, and it's almost evidence. You know, I bet many people here have never had any kind of experience or even thought about aliens, and that should be a red flag right there. My book makes the argument that the probable explanation for the elusiveness of aliens, for the sort of slippery quality that they have, is that in fact they do not exist, that they are not here. And I worry that this has become sort of the maverick position in our society. I will say this, that by being unfalsifiable, and this is sort of the complex argument I've tried to make with some people who are true believers, I say that, okay, you can believe if you want, but your aliens lack verification. They're not falsifiable, and therefore they have no scientific stature. You know, they should not get credentials at the APS meeting. But you can believe in them if you want to. I try to be sympathetic with that. And my job is not actually to go around telling people that they believe in things that I think are preposterous. I think of aliens, I think we're all searchers. I think that everyone, whether they have a PhD, whether they're a physicist, whether they're a school teacher, whether they're a truck driver, that we're all searchers trying to find out the truth about why we're here. What is the significance of this incredible fact that, you know, we are aware that we are this one little world in an unbelievably immense universe. I view the whole belief in aliens as sort of a heresy of modern astronomy. It's sunk into the consciousness of ordinary people that the universe is really, really big. I mean, they may not know the exact story of Hubble and Humason and the Cepheid variables, that pointed out that the Andromeda Nebula was extragalactic. They don't know the whole story, but they know the universe is really, really big. And moreover, they've heard people like Carl Sagan, who's sort of the hero of my book, even though he's a little peculiar at times. They hear Sagan say, well, he thinks that there are 1 million, or he thought that there were 1 million civilizations in our galaxy alone. So for people to believe that the aliens are here is just a tweaking, really, of the official narrative. I mean, it's just a question of location. Now, aliens, it's been widely commented that aliens are sort of like angels and demons, and there's in a sense that they're kind of the secular version of those creatures. It's important to a lot of people. I was really struck by how many people would tell me that they really love science, and they would say how much they love Carl Sagan, how much they read Scientific American, and they want to just grab it by the lapels and say, listen, Joel, trust me, I am not a nut, okay? I'm not one of these kooks, okay? They say I am a skeptic, and then they would tell me about the big war between the humanoid aliens and the reptilians. What people like about aliens is that they can allege that they are adhering to science because they believe in these things, because aliens are not a figment of some belief system. They are allegedly real. I mean, they actually use real technology. They come from real places out in the universe. They use real spaceships. The spaceships use propulsion mechanisms that we're not quite sure how they do that. I heard one idea that they use element 115. And of course, what is element 115? I don't know. It has incredible properties. Aliens find us interesting. This is one of the great things about them, is they can't keep their hands off of us. I mean, the central irony of the UFO world is that at first glance, it seems very much in adherence to the Copernican principle. There's nothing special about human beings. We're just, one world among many. There's other intelligent life out there. But in truth, it's a very anthropocentric belief system, because the aliens are always just desperate to cross gazillion miles of space to come here and visit people in their bedrooms at night. I mean, it's just, and in particular, there's this idea that there's a breeding program going on, that the aliens are missing something. And you all know that the aliens they have all kinds, they have great science, they have incredible technology, but they don't have enough feelings. They're emotionally lacking. I say in one of my books that aliens are a little bit like scientists. Don't take that wrong. They solve problems, I tried very hard in this book not to make fun of people. There was one guy that I remember who, he had a problem with his neck. He was in a lot of pain, and he said, aliens, I hear they have incredible medicine. And he told me about how he took this flight on a flying saucer from Arkansas to the White House and back in 15 minutes and so forth. And I checked at that point, but and still I kept thinking, this guy, he's in pain. And this is hope for him. And for many people, aliens, they're the solution, and they make perfect sense. I'm going to read this one little part, if I may be allowed to do so. Just a few paragraphs from my book about Jan and Misha, who are two women who believe that they are from space. And I want to make a point that these are, I like Jan and Misha a lot. To me, they're just ordinary people, but for them, they have this unusual belief system that makes perfect sense to them. Misha and Jan, I learned, were on an incredible voyage of self-discovery. Misha ran a support group for people who had experiences with aliens. She was gradually coming to terms with the theory advanced by Jan, which is that they themselves were aliens in human bodies, or starseed. Jan knew with absolute conviction that she was from the Pleiades. Misha seemed to be wavering. If she was from space, she was from somewhere in Orion. But she had doubts. This was a very old belief system, even by UFO standards. Jan told me she occupied a human body that used to go by the name of Val. That she wasn't, I don't know how to say this without sounding really weird, that she wasn't really my mom, that she was a walk-in. But then she says, I think that it's quite possible that things like this happen, because for people to assume we're the only race out there is just stupid. Anyway, this is an idea actually that it is, I call it sort of the water cooler paradigm of life beyond Earth, which is that it's stupid or arrogant or it's inappropriate to postulate that there's something special about us. And it takes the whole mystery of extraterrestrial life, which to me is an empirical question we have to solve, and reduces it to kind of an attitudinal issue. It's not just that it would be incorrect to say that there are not aliens out there. It would be a gasp. It would be inappropriate. Now, you could ask, why do people believe in this stuff? And the easy answer is, well, they're crazy or they're nuts. But it's not true. One of the things I really came to terms with is that you don't have to be crazy to be wrong. In fact, you don't even have to be stupid to be wrong. I mean, a lot of the people I interviewed who are true believers are incredibly smart. People with PhDs, some of them who are have respected positions at universities or and so forth. But they're still wrong. You could argue that being wrong is sort of a great intellectual tradition almost, going back to Aristotle. There's some of our greatest figures in science arguably were always wrong. Like Freud, was he right about anything? And the Pleiadians, as I call them, the Genamisha and their friends, they were aware there was a lot of kookiness out there. They didn't want to be part of some kind of nutty thing. In fact, they made it was very important to them that they had an unlisted number for their support group because they said, we don't want any kooks calling up. They had, but I will say this, they did not have, they didn't really follow the scientific method. I mentioned earlier that aliens have the problem of not being falsifiable. They also, you see a lot of sort of new agey groups, and in some groups where they really believe strongly in the UFO presence, is a real desire to prove the existence of these things and to find any scrap of evidence that is validated and to shy away from invalidation. In fact, the support group that Janet Misha ran had as one of its premier rules. It said, you will not invalidate the experiences of anyone else in this group. It was like a feel-good group. And right there, that's sort of, I would say, quite contrary to how scientists seem to work. I sort of notice occasionally that when a scientist makes a whole announcement or proclamation, there's great glee among the colleagues to rush forward and say, it's not true. And that is probably a good instinct. It might come off as a little sort of rude or whatever, but over time that seems to work in advancing us towards the truth. My impression was that people don't really understand how amazing and the way how beautiful the story of science is. That is the scientific view of how we got here. We live in a world where there's sort of a huge market of nonsense, and some of the other speakers will talk about this. Michael Shermer is the expert on this. I mean, there's all these claims, all these books, TV shows that make this argument that there are things going on that are just incredible, tremendous. And science, I think, has to do a better job of competing with that. I mourn the loss of Carl Sagan because he was able to explain science and sell science as something that was not only true, it was wonderful. And so it's important not to disparage the popularizers in your profession because there's sort of a competition out there for the hearts and minds of people. And I would say that in a sense science has been losing that competition. The news media, my business has not always been good on this issue either, and certainly in popular culture, the aliens have been promoted. We were talking about the X-Files walking over here. I don't want to demonize the X-Files because I think it can be a very entertaining show. I did, as part of my attention deficit reporting, I did actually go to the set of the X-Files, and I was shocked to learn that Gillian Anderson, who plays Scully, the skeptic of the show, in real life, she says to me, I would be shocked if the aliens weren't here and there weren't a government cover-up. I mean, she's like everyone else. She believes in all this stuff. Unfortunately, the company on the show, plays the believer in real life. He doesn't believe any of that stuff. He said, our show tells people that there's a reason bad things happen to you because there's bad guys out there. It's not random. And he says, our show is more religious than touched by nature. I'm going to stop here in a second, but I just want to mention don't really appreciate what they are. When they're walking through the world, they don't really appreciate the fact that they are the distillate of 4 billion years of evolution. That's what science tells us. Science tells us that it's been this amazing voyage from prebiotic molecules to what we are. And that's sometimes viewed as sort of a skeptical view or a narrow-minded view. I don't think so at all. I think it's an incredible story. I think it moves me to think that this world has been habitable for 4 billion years, and that my ability to sort of think and talk and appreciate things and listen to music and to perceive the world is this sort of gift of evolution. And doing this book has sort of changed the way I look at the world. I mean, it made me appreciate being, I don't want to get all mushy here, never break down. I think it has made me appreciate being a human being, being a sentient creature all the more. And I think that one problem with the estimations, the abundant intelligent life, is it tells people that intelligence is cheap, and that we are ordinary, and that they shouldn't assume there's anything special about them. I don't want to go back to the pre-Copernican days, but I think that in my book I make the argument that there are all these constraints on life, constraints on the habitability of the planets. This case is made very well in a new book called Rare Earth. There are reasons to believe that although the Earth is not literally unique and intelligence is not unique, it may be very rare and very special. And I hope that in my lifetime that we can continue to solve this great mystery of life out there in the universe, and that we don't just jump to conclusions and presume we are in error. I say let's go out and find out the truth. So thank you very much. There's some leakage from people who believe that there's life out there. But there's no really solid number, but routinely you do find numbers that a third to a half of the population, believes that the aliens are here. Bill Clinton, when he, was elected president, turned to Webb Hubbell, his buddy from Arkansas, and said, "There's 2 things I want you to find out, when you go to justice. Who shot JFK? Are there UFOs?" Clinton is like, he's a smart guy, like anyone else, though. I mean, he grew up in an era in which this idea has been very powerful. And we all did. It's been going on for 50 years. So. The question is, do I include the organized religions as those who believe in aliens? No, by and large, I have found that it's not a mainstream religious preoccupation. There is, if anything, you'd say that it's the New Age groups who are sort of outside the religious mainstream, who are very much into spirituality, who have adopted the UFOs as part of their cosmology. The big news in the UFO world, you could say, in the last 20 years or so, has been the move from hardware to software. And since 20 years ago or 30 years ago, or way back in the 50s in particular, people kept seeing spaceships or lights or objects. They saw, metallic things they didn't understand. And in the last 20 years, there's been this big transition to
This is not our next speaker. We had invited David Licken to speak on the polygraph. It turns out that he is in fact recovering from heart surgery and could not make it. But we give up nothing in the process. In his place, we have his colleague, a very distinguished professor here from the University of Minnesota, William Iacono. And he is currently the distinguished McKnight University Professor and Director of Clinical Psychology Training Program at the University of Minnesota. He specializes in psychophysiology, the basic science from which polygraph testing is an application. He is a past president of the international scientific organization known as the Society for Psychophysiological Research. He's received the Distinguished Scientific Contribution Award from this organization as well as from the American Psychological Association. He's published over 175 scientific articles, and has over 50 scientific presentations and publications on lie detection or polygraphy. His work was cited by the United States Supreme Court in U.S. versus Chubb, the 1998 case that eliminated polygraph tests from military courts-martial. And I am very grateful to him for coming today and filling in, and I'm anxious to hear what he has to say. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to show some slides and then do some overheads. I'm not exactly sure how to get all this stuff to work. Okay, here we go. Now if we could have the lights dim, that would be great, and be able to see the slides better. So you're a lie detector. If you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to worry about, right? I'm not going to answer this question, but I am going to do, though, hopefully, is give you enough information so that you can answer the question by the time we leave. I got interested in studying lie detection about 20 years ago, and I was trying to attract graduate students to work in my psychophysiology laboratory. And I was having difficulty coming up with a sexy topic that would get people interested in it. So I proposed that we could do a lie detector study. We did a study. It got published in a top psychology journal. And based on that, I was catapulted to the forefront of expert knowledge in this particular field, which attracts almost no scientist to it. It's a field that's dominated by attorneys, police officers, individuals with high school and college educations who have been trained as polygraph operators and make extremely significant and life-changing decisions about lots and lots of people. This cartoon says, I ran a fever of 104 for 5 days, talk about aches and pains. It felt like I was pinned under a bus, plus my skin had this hideous green tint, and you can see the needle here is pointing to bald-faced line, and it says standard procedure after taking sick leave at Maxwell Global Industries. Well, this in fact is one of the most widespread uses of the polygraph in this country up until about 1990. Prior to that time, in most states, employers could require their employees to take polygraph tests at any time in order to maintain their employment. So for instance, food chain restaurateurs like McDonald's would give polygraph tests to employees as a way of making sure they didn't shortchange the till at the end of the day, or to check, in fact, if they did. Department stores would give polygraph tests to employees to see if they gave unauthorized discounts to their relatives who purchased items at the store. If they did, they'd be fired. If you're working at McDonald's, you fail a polygraph test and lose your job, it's probably not a big deal, because you can go over to Burger King and they're not going to care too much about your employment history at McDonald's, most likely. But if you are a manager of a department store, or a manager of a bank, or a 40-year-old person who's got 15 or 20 years invested in your career, and you fail a polygraph test, this could be the end of your career as you know it. For instance, if you're a vice president of a bank, there's an irregularity detected, you take a polygraph test, you fail, the president of the bank might say, I don't really think you did this, but in order for me to, reduce the heat that's being applied to this particular incident, I have to let you go. So you now go and apply for a job at another bank. They're going to say, well, tell us about your employment history and why were you let go by First National Bank? And your response is going to be something like, well, I failed a polygraph test. I didn't really do it. So if you're the president of this other company, are you going to hire an employee like this? Probably not. Well, in the 1980s, Congress commissioned a study by the Office of Technology Assessment to look into the accuracy of polygraph tests used this way. And that study was pretty clear that polygraph tests had no basis, no scientific basis, and no evidence to support their use that way. So that led to the passage of this particular law, the Employee Polygraph Protection Act,
which has basically banned the use of polygraph tests in the private sector with employees. The government, though, in its wisdom, decided to exempt itself from this particular law. And so today, the greatest purveyor of polygraphy, the organization that trains the most polygraph operators, and the organization that gives the most polygraph tests of any organization in the world is the United States government. It's because of this that I guess I'm here today. Polygraphy began in the 1920s when a psychologist, a Harvard psychologist named William Marston, invented this blood pressure test, which you can kind of see here, a little fuzzy. This woman's got a blood pressure cuff on her arm. She's asked questions like, did you take the money? Her blood pressure goes up. Marston concludes she's lying. Marston actually had quite an incredible career that followed out of the development of this test. For one thing, he used the test in a famous murder case in the 1920s that was called Pride. And he tried to get the results of the test introduced in court as scientific evidence. He failed, but the United States Supreme Court, which ended up reviewing this case, issued the famous Pride decision, which perhaps some of you have heard about, and that serves as the basis to this day about what constitutes valid scientific evidence in many courts, including, for example, in California. Federal law has modified the Pride criteria slightly, but it's still an important part of what constitutes scientific evidence. Here you can see new facts about shaving revealed by lie detector. Here's Professor Marston once again. And if you look in the middle of the slide, it says actual record of one man's shave as recorded by lie detector. This is actually a control study. They had a guy shave one side of his face with a razor blade, he didn't know what it was, and then shaved the other side while they monitored his physiological activity. And you can see in the middle panel here, there's squiggles moving up and down. That was not the Gillette razor. Marston also developed the comic strip character Wonder Woman. You might remember Wonder Woman had this interesting talent of being able to put a lasso around people that she cornered, and with the lasso around them, they couldn't tell a lie. Some of the most amusing lies on record have been told in connection with the lie detector itself. If there's a single idea you want to take home from this talk, that's probably it. These are the actual attachments that are used in a lie detector test. Up at the top here, you see a blood pressure cuff. This is very much like the blood pressure cuff that would be put on your arm. In a physician's office, there's two pneumatic tubes that are placed around your chest, one on the upper part of your chest, the other closer to your stomach. As you breathe in and out, the air pressure changes in these tubes, and that pressure change can be recorded on a polygraph chart. And then down here you can see a couple of stainless steel electrodes that are attached to your fingertips. These electrodes measure the galvanic skin response from an imperceptible current that's run through your fingers. The basic technology for conducting a lie detector test using this type of instrumentation has been around since the 1940s. It basically has not changed since the 1940s. The only thing that's really changed is they've beefed up the electronics a little bit, and they've added computers to replace the strip chart that comes out of a polygraph. But basically there have many real important innovations in the use of polygraph tests for how they're applied in the last 60 years or so. Here's an example of the actual recording equipment. Nowadays this might be attached to a computer that would replace the strip chart with a monitor screen that will let you know what exactly is being recorded. Here's an example of a setup. A person sits in a chair, their arms elevated, blood pressure cuff, pneumo tubes around the chest, DSR electrodes on the fingertips. The polygraph operator typically sits slightly behind and out of sight of the person taking the test. Now here's an example of what a response is supposed to look like. What you can see here is the pneumo tracings produce these little squiggles as the person breathes in and out. The GSR tracing produces a nice bump right at the point where the person is asked a question, blood pressure rises. This you can see is a quote-unquote classic lying reaction. Respiration is suppressed. insulin resistance decreases, blood pressure rises. Now, it turns out, as we just reviewed, the polygraph does indeed measure blood pressure changes, breathing movements, and palmar sweating in terms of differences in electrodermal activity. What it doesn't measure, though, is lying. The polygraph examiners would like us to think that it measures lying, but it doesn't. How, though, do they go about deciding whether a person is lying or not? Well, they do it by giving different types of tests. And these are the basic tests that are given, in particular the first two. Almost every test that's given in the context of some kind of an investigation that might be run by the government is going to be a variant or a blend of these two procedures. I'm going to talk about each one. I'm going to start about the guilty knowledge test first, then I'm going to talk about the control question test, and finally the irrelevant test, which is the test that actually you in this room might be most likely to ever take if it's made a condition of your employment that you take a polygraph test. Now imagine that a theft is committed. Someone breaks into an office and they take some money. If you're going to develop a polygraph test to determine whether or not a person was guilty of such a theft, how might you do it? Well, what the polygraph profession does is they ask people questions like, did you take the money out of the office? But there's actually an alternative procedure that could be used. It's called the guilty knowledge test. The guilty knowledge test is a type of multiple choice procedure where instead of picking the answer to the test by verbally responding to the questions, your nervous system indicates the answer by giving a recognition response when you, the guilty person, recognizes the correct multiple choice alternative. If you're an innocent person and you didn't take the money out of the office, you'd have no way of recognizing what the correct multiple choice alternative is. If you're asked a sequence of these types of questions, then the likelihood of an innocent person, by chance alone, hitting on all of the guilty alternatives is pretty low. If it's a well-designed test, the corresponding likelihood of a guilty person recognizing the facts that are relevant to the crime is pretty high. Here's an example of what these questions might look like on a guilty knowledge test. For instance, how much money was in the pouch stolen from the office? Was it $500, $1,000, $15,000, $2,000, $2,500? If you took the money, chances are you counted it, and you know what the answer to the question is. What denomination were the bills that were stolen? Well, it turns out they were all 100s. If you took the money, you'd know that. If you didn't, you wouldn't. What other item was in the drawer with the money? Was it a photograph, a lottery ticket, a deck of cards, a pair of gloves, a hairbrush, etc.? By asking a series of questions like this, you have a pretty good way of protecting innocent people and also identifying guilty people. In fact, if you have a test that's composed of, for example, 10 items, each with 5 alternatives, the likelihood of an innocent person failing 5 or more of these items is less than 1%. And the likelihood of a guilty person not hitting 5 or more of these items is about 3%. So this test actually has reasonable scientific foundation and is reasonably accurate, and that's been shown repeatedly in laboratory studies. Now the government doesn't use this test. In fact, they despise this particular procedure. There are a number of reasons for that. One is because it's a very complicated test to give. You actually have to be thoughtful and think about how you develop the evidence in a crime so that you can produce these kinds of questions. But the real reason they don't use this test is because it's difficult, and the procedures they do use, they think are basically infallible, and they're very easy to use. Now, the bread and butter test of a criminal investigation is called a control question test. And you can see here it consists of different types of questions. It includes an irrelevant question like, is today Sunday, or it could be, is today Tuesday? Relevant questions like, did you take the missing money? About the missing pouch of money, did you take it? And then there's things called control questions. Have you ever told a lie about anything important to stay out of trouble? Now, the basic theory of the control question test is that if you're guilty, then you're going to respond more to did you take the missing money than have you ever told a lie about anything important to stay out of trouble. That's because if you're guilty, you're going to be real worried about the fact that you're lying when you took the missing money, and you're not going to be worried about the fact that you ever told a lie about anything important to stay out of trouble. An innocent person, though, didn't take the money, so the innocent person isn't going to be concerned about that. The innocent person, though, is going to think, wow, you know, it's really important that I'm honest in this test, and I did tell a lie about something important. So that's the question I'm going to be focused on, and that's where I'm going to respond strongly. The problem with the control question test, though, is that the relevant question is just as relevant for the innocent person as it is for the guilty person. If the stakes are high, you're facing a loss of employment, going to prison, something like that, and you're really innocent, you're worried about this, especially if you think the procedure probably isn't all that accurate to begin with, you might really be very focused on this particular question. Now, research studies have been conducted, published in the best scientific journals, indicate that this procedure is strongly biased against innocent people. So innocent people who take the control question test basically have slightly better than chance odds of passing the test. So if you're innocent, someone says, you want to take a polygraph test, it's a control question test, flip a coin, because that's the likelihood that you're going to pass. If you're guilty, the best research suggests that it might have an accuracy as high as 75% when people don't use countermeasures to defeat the test. How do you use countermeasures to defeat a test like this? Simply by doing something that causes you to respond strongly to the control question. Like what? Well, when you're asked this question, you can curl your toes in your shoe. You can tighten your anal sphincter. You can lightly bite your tongue. You can do serial subtraction in your head as rapidly as you can. Again, studies have shown, published in the best scientific journals, that if you adopt these simple procedures, you can augment your response to the control question in such a way that makes it so it's larger than your response to the relevant question. A big purpose of the government's polygraph testing procedure is to identify spies. If you've got a person who's a spy and they know about something like this, are they going to learn what to do when they're asked control questions? Are they going to learn how to recognize them and how to augment their response to them? I think they would. You know, the type of test, the other type of test is called the relevant-irrelevant test. And it involves sets of questions like this, like, are you now sitting in a chair on May 30th, 85, did you rob the First National Bank? This is actually the type of test that Marston introduced back in the early part of the century. Now, the idea here is that if you're guilty, you're going to respond more strongly to the relevant question. If you're innocent, you respond about equally to both because they're of equivalent emotional significance and psychological impact. You can see here now a real problem with these types of tests is that the relevant questions are very provocative, but the comparison questions aren't so provocative. So that's why all these procedures are biased against innocent people. Now, the relevant-irrelevant test is the test that has been developed into the employee screening test that you're likely to take if you're a government employee. And DOE employees might be asked to take these kinds of tests, but any government employee with a security clearance might be asked one or another variants of these tests. People who apply for jobs for the FBI, for instance, have to be able to pass tests like this in order to complete their background check. Now here's an actual test that comes right out of the U.S. Army Military Police School that shows these types of questions that might be asked on a counterintelligence polygraph examination. So are you wearing boots? Are you in the Army? Have you ever been involved in communist or terrorist activity? Do you plan to commit espionage or sabotage against the United States? Are you sometimes called Bill? Did you falsify or omit any information from your statement of criminal history? Did you ever possess, use, or transfer any illegal drugs or narcotics? Now what you can see here is the relevant questions are interspersed with irrelevant questions. If you respond strongly to the relevant questions, it's going to be a focus of attention on the part of the polygrapher. Now when these tests are actually used, they're used to make you feel uncomfortable and to see if they can get you to divulge interesting information. So if I was a polygraph operator giving you this test, after I ran through these 8 questions, I might say, now, wait a minute, Bill. You understand how important it is for you to be really truthful here, right? I got to tell you, I'm looking at your charts here, and I'm really bothered that you're holding something back. Isn't there something else you want to tell me, Bill? Well, you don't even know what he's talking about. He may ask you a bunch of sort of threatening questions here. Which question is he sort of zeroed in on that you're supposed to be bothered with? So you're going to take a stab at it. So you're going to say something like, well, geez, I hate to tell you this, but in fact, when I was in college, I did kind of mess around with drugs a little bit. Well, right there, you've given the polygraph operator what he was looking for. For a lot of polygraph operators, you're now actually more more likely to pass the test than if you just said, no, I told you everything. Because they're now going to think that, in fact, yes, you are trying to be honest, you are trying to cooperate, you are trying to work with them. Now, on the other hand, if you do answer this question about, yeah, well, I did use drugs, then they're going to ask all sorts of other questions. How many times? What drugs? Was it cocaine? Was it marijuana? Did you ever use stuff like heroin? And then they're going to whip out of their polygraph test bag a whole new set of questions, just like this list that you just saw, but now they're going to be about different kinds of drugs, whether you sold them, and this sort of thing. And once again, when you're asked all those questions, they might stop and say, I hate to tell you this, Bill, but it looks like once again you're holding something back. This can go on literally for hours, even days. It's not uncommon for these types of polygraph tests to be spread out over several days, totaling 15, 20 hours. That's rare, but it does happen that people take polygraph tests for this length of time. One concern about these tests is that they involve lifestyle questions, and our government has not been averse to asking lifestyle questions. These are actual questions that used to be asked. They're not asked anymore, at least they're not supposed to be, on these types of polygraph tests. Like, have you ever engaged in a sexual act with another male? It's obviously a test for a male. Have you been the active partner in an act of oral or anal sodomy? Have you engaged in sex acts with animals? And of course, my favorite, have you ever received sexual stimulation in a crowded area? If we're asked these questions, the examiner might say, gee, looks like you're holding back, and you start divulging information. You can see how creepy taking a test like this is going to make you feel. Now, let's go back here. These tests, there's really almost no data on how accurate they are. And what data does exist on these types of tests indicates that they actually work worse than chance on innocent people if you actually score them using the standards that polygraph operators use when they give these tests. Now, the most recent test the government's developed is called the test for espionage and sabotage, and sometimes the test, they have terrorism to it. It involves being asked these types of relevant questions, like have you committed espionage, have you given classified material to an unauthorized person, have you failed to notify, this is a misworded question, but the idea is have you failed to notify your superiors about contacts you have with foreign nationals, have you committed sabotage, or might be a question, have you committed acts of terrorism? And these types of questions are then, alternated with what are called directed line control questions. And so the question here would be, have you ever committed a minor traffic violation? Now, you're actually supposed to tell the polygraph operator, in this case, that in fact you did commit a minor traffic violation. And you're supposed to think about the minor traffic violation that you committed when you're asked this question. And the idea is that that's going to provoke a live response in you, and then that's going to be compared to whether or not you've committed acts of terrorism. And if you respond more strongly to the question about terrorism than about the traffic violation, which in fact you already admit you're lying to, you're going to fail this test. Same problem exists. Of course, the directed lies are not adequate controls for the emotional impact of being asked the relevant questions. Now, the government's own laboratory research on this test, they've got two studies. The results are summarized here. And what you can see is that people who pretend to be innocent in these studies, 13% fail the test. And of the people who pretend to be guilty in these studies, 17% pass the test. Now, when you think about giving this type of test to people who work in government labs or who hold jobs with security clearances, what we're really worried about is this rate up here. The fact that you've got innocent people who have already passed security clearances, who have years of faithful service to the government, who have highly technical jobs and a great deal of expertise, are now going to take a test and they're going to fail. Does the government fail 13% of people who take polygraph tests? You know, if there's 1,000 people who take a polygraph test, how many spies are there? Maybe one or two, maybe none. How many innocent people are there? 999 or so. 130 would fail the test, according to the government's best statistics on the accuracy of this procedure. The government actually keeps statistics on how often people fail polygraph tests, and the rates are extremely low, around 1%, 2%. Over thousands and thousands and thousands of tests. Why is that? How do they give rates that are that low? The reason they give rates that low is because the examiners know when they give a test, that they can't afford to fail people, even people who typically look guilty to them using the standards that they apply, because if they did, it would wreak havoc with the whole system. And so the polygraph operators in some way raise the threshold for failing a test so high that virtually no one fails. And in fact, probably, in order to really fail this test, you have to give the polygrapher the creeps yourself in the process of taking the test. Like you have to seem uncooperative, like you're holding something back, admit things that seem weird, give responses that can't be explained. There have to be an awful lot going on before you can fail. I'm going to just finish the talk here by showing a few overheads that just give you a few more things to think about. Some of these would just be kind of like summary statements at this point. Polygraph tests are not true tests. They're interviews assisted by a prop. The administration is not standardized. Every examiner comes up with their own questions, their own way of proceeding. Idiosyncrasies related to scoring. The scoring and interpretation are not objective. The only kind of scoring is objective is when it's done by a computer, but the computer algorithms that are used to score these tests have never been open to public scrutiny. The way they work hasn't been published. Their validity has not been checked. We know that scoring and interpretation are not objective from something as simple as what's in the news about when Lee Ho takes the test, passes, government announced polygraph program for testing all government employees, reviews his chart, he's failed. Is that an objective procedure? No, it's not. They had to fail on the test to justify giving a test that probably doesn't work to all these government employees. An interesting fact about these tests is far more people fail pre-employment than post-employment screening tests. So if you want to get a government job, even though you're taking the same basic test, the chances are very high that you'll fail. If you've already got the job, the chances are very low that you'll fail. That's because it doesn't cost the government anything to fail someone who's applying for a job, like it does to fail someone who's already got it. And then another point you want to keep in mind here is that your ability to convince the examiner you're being honest is the key to getting through this test. Now, the point is that these tests are not accurate. They're strongly biased against innocent individuals. People can easily learn to defeat them just by learning to recognize these different types of questions and know when to bite their tongue or do mental arithmetic. And the fact that the tests are hooked up to computers means nothing. It's still 1940s technology. It's just 1940s technology dressed up with a computer. When we look at what psychologists, knowledgeable psychologists, think about polygraph testing, and I've done surveys of this, I can tell you that fellows in the American Psychological Association and members of the Psychophysiological Research overwhelmingly at rates of 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1, do not believe that polygraph tests are based on sound psychological principles or theory. They do not believe they're accurate, and they do believe they can be easily defeated. And in particular, psychologists think they can easily learn to defeat them, which means probably all of you should feel that way too. Now, why are the tests used anyway, given what I said? Well, one of the main reasons why is because the polygraph examiners who control the application believe the tests are nearly infallible. This is what they're taught in school. They're not taught anything about tests being infallible. They don't read my papers, for instance. If you were going to give a test that could ruin a person's life, how would you sleep at night? Well, the only way you can sleep at night is by believing that it's actually infallible. So they really have to believe that these tests work. They're police officers, they're not scientists, they don't read the scientific literature, they're not trained to evaluate it. And then the two most important reasons why I think polygraph operators believe in the test is that under the pressure of taking tests, oftentimes people make admissions. A polygraph operator says, well, I think you failed my test, and the person taking the test says, you're right, I committed a crime. Well, the polygraph operator knows then that the test worked. The problem is when they make errors, they're not revealed to the examiner. And that's because in most cases we don't know what ground truth is with these tests. One polygraph operator testified before the Minnesota State Legislature that he had personally given 20,000 tests and had never been shown to be wrong. Well, the fact is, given 20,000 tests and hardly ever had the opportunity to be shown that he was wrong. If a guilty person passes the test, what's the guilty person going to do at the end? Go, I fooled you, I actually did it. And it is the person who fails the test and protests, hey, I'm innocent. The examiner says, no, you're not, you failed the test. If a judge or a jury releases someone who fails a polygraph test, the polygraph operator says, well, that's why we need to elect more Republicans. And this is my last point to leave you with, and I don't think the government's use of these tests is likely to change, and that's because the government finds the tests have great utility. The admissions and confessions that people make when they take these tests, the government finds invaluable. It saves them lots of time thinking about how the FBI would launch an investigation to find out how many joints of marijuana you smoked when you were 20. You can just do a polygraph test and people spill the beans readily. The government believes these tests have deterrent effects. So they don't actually care whether they work to a certain extent, but they know that they scare people. Richard Nixon was the first to publicly articulate this when he launched the testing program for government employees. This, by the way, cuts across party lines. It's not like the use of these tests has dropped under the Clinton administration. In fact, it's probably increased substantially. Few government officials understand the science behind these tests, and many government officials have had positive experience with polygraph tests. The federal government, including the Department of Defense, is full of people, career employees, who are former polygraph operators, who are there influencing policy and making sure that we don't stop using these tests. And the final point I want to make is that from the government's point of view, there's little evidence that government use has led to abuse. In the same way, I have to tell them, don't tell them I have anything to do with the show, or else they won't come on, because I know a lot of these people. Let me just make a few remarks about some of my previous speakers' talks. I guess as an indication of our state of basic science knowledge, particularly in biology, isn't the correct answer to the question, have you ever had sex with an animal, as opposed to what? Basic Linnaean classification. We did a whole segment on lie detectors for Exploring the Unknown. We brought in an official government lie detector expert, and she hooked us up, hooked me up, and all the bells and whistles. And it's true, the new computer systems are very sophisticated, although it's the same technology taking the readings. But it's a classic definition of pseudoscience, or what Bob Park calls pseudoscience, because it looks like science. It has all the bells and whistles and graphs and charts and numbers, and it's intimidating. And what she presented to us was impressive. It looked like science, until we brought in our skeptic, who was this ex-cop from Oklahoma City, Doug Williams, who now makes a living giving courses for $49.95. It takes like 2 hours on how to beat the lie detector test. So I took his course, and it was very amusing. This guy, what is the lie detector? It's a psychological billy club, he said. That's all it is to get the confession. And the first time he ever gave the test, he said that they had the suspect in the room, and his boss showed him how to do the whole thing, and he went in there and gave the guy the test, hooked him up, came out, and the whole thing. Boss, I think he's lying. He said, well, we know he's lying. Get in there and get the confession. That's what this is for. And he explained how they do that. It's a good cop, bad cop. The lie detector is the bad cop. You know, it's 98.6% accurate. It's never wrong. And if you get caught lying and it shows up, ooh, the courts are real hard on it, real hard. Now listen, let's just, you and I have a little talk here before we get hooked up, because I don't want you to get caught on this machine. And it's you and I in this room. Yeah, you and I, the tape recorder, the video camera, the two-way there. They're ready for the confession. And he said they do lie to them all the time. They lie to suspects. Now, they only do this when they think they got the right guy, but that's the reality of the police, as you know, from Los Angeles, where I'm from. They do these things. But they will typically say, like, we got your fingerprints, and the guy says, you got my fingerprints? Yeah, and 3 eyewitnesses.